Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Raven Report, the official podcast of Sci-Tech High School. As always, I'm your host, Collin Kerouac. And before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to say thank you. This is our 10th episode of the Raven Report. We've officially crossed 150 plays and racked up over 1,300 views on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're so grateful for your support, your listens, and your engagement. It's what keeps this podcast going. Today, we're circling back to a topic that got a lot of attention when we first launched, the cell phone policy at Sci-Tech High School. In episode 1, we heard from students and our journalism team about the so-called cell phone ban. Now we're bringing in a new perspective, one that's been missing from the conversation. Joining us today is our campus principal, Mr. Sosa, along with students Deanna Sims and Benito Martinez. We're going to break down how this policy has played out so far, what's working, what's not, and whether students and staff can find some middle ground. Let's jump in. Mr. Sosa, welcome to the Raven Report. Thanks for being here.
No, thank you, Colin, for inviting me.
So let's start with your thoughts on episode 1. When we first covered the cell phone policy, we heard a mix of opinions. Some students saw the policy as necessary, while others felt it was too restrictive. What were your reactions after hearing that initial discussion?
So originally when we went with the policy as the way that it's written right now, there was a lot of conflict, even on our own side. Not conflict in terms of fight, but in terms of what we believe in. I will go ahead and start and clean out the record on, while we started with a ban, our push, what we would like to pursue towards, is more of a phone etiquette policy. So ensuring that scholars know proper usage, when it's socially acceptable, when it's not. Because we do have to consider that many of the kiddos right now, specifically you all, were COVID kiddos during middle school, when you all first received your cell phone. So that initial learning of when it's socially acceptable and when it's not wasn't really properly taught, because you were on Zoom and it was okay for you to use your cell phone during instructional time. There was no one there to self-direct. With all of that being said, again, we're not here to be fully restrictive, but that's where we needed to start with. But ultimately, our push is to go towards more of a phone etiquette.
You said some people opposed the ban, the initial policy. Was it from teachers and administration alike? Just teachers, just admin?
I think if you did a survey of the whole campus, you'll find teachers, seeing as that we have more teachers than we do admin, who will actually straddle both sides of it. We've got a couple of teachers here who say it should be the teacher's decision as to whether cell phones are put away or cell phones are kept out. And you'll have other teachers who say, no, cell phones shouldn't even be allowed on campus, period. So even more restrictive of where we allow it during lunch, during transitional time, in the morning, so forth. Some teachers feel like it shouldn't be on campus, period.
So the staff is pretty divided, I see.
And I think divided is a fair term, but I don't want to say that it's 50-50.
Right, makes sense. Since the start of the semester, when the policy was enforced, have y'all, as the administration, noticed any significant changes in student engagement or classroom behavior? Are teachers seeing improvements, or has enforcing the policy been a challenge?
So to get to the question of engagement, there's a lot of factors that will influence engagement, from scholar attitude to topic to even just the teacher that's present in the classroom. So to answer your question, we've seen less requests for administrative support for students refusing to turn over their cell phones or putting them away. So I feel like that's definitely assisted. To come back and say that it's improved or that there's been no change in engagement, I don't have enough data to say that the cell phone policy itself is the driver of that, or if it's just we've changed topics so that it's more enjoyable, or that the teacher has just become drier now after the first semester. So I think there's a lot to say. There's a lot to collect and a lot to think about before I can say yes or no.
Right. So too many variables to narrow down the cause.
Correct. But if we look at the sole indicator that we have, which is teacher calls or administrative support calls and then teacher referrals, we have seen a drastic reduction in those.
Another aspect to consider is how this policy affects students with different learning styles. Some students may rely on technology for note-taking or organization. Has the administration considered how to support these students while maintaining the integrity of the policy?
So we do have a couple of scholars who in their individual education plan receive note-taking assistance. Typically that's laid out with the scholar will attempt the notes, and then they'll be provided with notes either from the teacher or peer assistance. But for us as a network, what we really rely on is a Google extension called Read and Write, which allows the scholars to go ahead and get that note-taking assistance either through speech to text or text to speech through their Chromebook.
Makes sense.
That being said, Colin, while you prepare yourself for the next question, I do want to come back to the idea of the phone etiquette. As a college student, yes, we most definitely had tape recorders that we would set up in the front of the classroom, hit record so that we could record the teacher's lecture. I would be surprised if that hasn't transitioned away from digital recorders to cell phones. But one of the biggest things that I heard and I still see as I have friends that are college professors is that I need to be asked. As a college professor, you must ask me first whether it's okay to record my lecture or not. So we still have that aspect of phone etiquette and just digital device etiquette. I have a couple of professors, both old and new, who are kind of on the fence of whether or not kids should be taking notes on their Chromebook, like on their computer during class time. Because again, they don't know if they're sitting there chatting, if they're watching movies, so forth. So even at a collegiate level, we take away the phone and just put a computer in front of kiddos or in front of learners. You're going to see some of the same concerns that we're battling here at the high school level with just a phone. So it's going to be everywhere. I think the best way, again, to address it, and I don't mean to cut you off, Colin, I think the best way to address it is to focus on the etiquette, when it's proper, when it's expected, and to just learn and regulate ourselves on that sense rather than just completely taking it away.
Right. Got to find a balance,
I agree.
And now, I'd like to bring in our student panel, Deanna Sims and Benito Martinez. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I want to hear y'all's perspective. We heard Sosa's perspective, and feel free to, this is open debate, this is open discussion, so feel free to discuss. You all had an opportunity to hear Mr. Sosa's perspective. Did anything he say shift your thoughts on the so-called cell phone ban?
I think the phone etiquette, like moving towards phone etiquette, really changed my perspective on where it's at now, and knowing that it's moving toward a phone etiquette policy really eases my mind kind of where the cell phone policy is at now.
Yeah, I like that they use the cell phone ban, and people don't like that. So when you're really trying to get the cell phone etiquette, they're going to move it back down to like, it's not really.
You're not going to have as much pushback.
Exactly. So people will be more accepted, but you're still trying.
There is definitely a negotiating tool where you ask for more,
exactly.
knowing that you'll accept less, so that when they counteroffer, using the economic language, when they counteroffer for a lower amount, you're like, that's fine.
That's probably what I'm saying. Like, you ask for like a really high price, and then but your actual aim was a little lower than that. So when you negotiating, they settle for what you wanted.
Now that said, I'm sure the question's kind of floating around of, well, why did we start with that in the beginning? So while there is a lot of research that shows that there's actually not, I take that back. There is some emerging research that shows that cell phone etiquette works just as well as any hardcore and heavily enforced cell phone ban. Where we struggle with is there's not much curriculum or much kind of, I guess, lessons or anything that we can readily use. So we would have to turn around and create it ourselves. So what does that look like for freshmen? What does that look like for middle schoolers? And as much as I'd love to say that we have the time to do it, we don't. And so part of the conversation that we had is, as much as we'd love to turn around and implement phone etiquette this year, we don't have the resources to do it. So we need time in order to address that. And in the meantime, we just went with the cell phone ban. That being said, it fit well with the readjustment to the use of the backpacks. I will say, just as a side note, one of the things that we did see is scholars were using their cell phones less, but we saw more using their headphones, especially now that winter came around with the use of hoodies and beanies. So putting the cell phone in the backpack and putting the backpack on the other side of the classroom would break that Bluetooth connection for the majority of our kiddos. We saw several birds that we were hitting with one stone with the use of the cell phone ban. But again, if we had a resource that we could have used and rolled out during Raven's Nest or during more conversation around phone etiquette, I can guarantee you we would have gone there.
Speaking of the cell phone etiquette, so you've said that the cell phone ban was not the intention to be the final solution. You keep bringing up the cell phone etiquette. What does that look like? What is the long-term goal? What is the long-term plan, or the initial end goal, I should say?
One of the big things that comes out within the idea of restorative practices is that we do skill development. And what skill development looks like is we identify where the skill deficit is and then provide either modeling, practice, or reinforcement so that we build the skill that we want. And it's going to follow the same thing, the use of your phone at proper times. So when the instructor is instructing, or when you're providing, or when you're getting lessons, so forth, will either be modeled, will be taught and practiced, will be reinforced. Because again, it's still a skill. So I see it as the same thing as for when you all were elementary kiddos and they would have you practice lining up to go to lunch or to go to specials, where they would model it, they would praise the kids that do it. They would not reprimand, but they would remind, this is what we're supposed to be doing right now. This is what it looks like. So it's going to look like any kind of basic skill development, whether it be for a kindergarten scholar or for an adult where you're just trying to change your habits. If we look at some of the work that James Clear does about changing your habits and having trigger habits and just some triggers or some compounding habits on there, it's all going to be the same thing. It just comes down to skill development.
What would be appropriate times to have your cell phone in school? Could it be during class when there's no instruction given and you're just doing independent work? Is it only during lunch, or could it be used, like I said, during class when there's independent work done?
I'm going to take off my principal hat on that one and put on my if I were a teacher in the classroom hat and had the independence, the autonomy to decide that. I would be fine with scholars using it during class time, provided that we weren't doing something where I was facilitating instruction or learning. There wasn't conversation going on. So if you have the next 30 minutes to go ahead and do the application problems, finish off some work, do some practice, and you need that to help, that's fine. You go right on ahead, provided it's not disruptive to those around you. If I take off that teacher hat, that classroom teacher hat, and put on my principal's hat, I think it's unfair to kind of say when I think it would be appropriate without getting voices from both the staff, like the teaching staff, from other administrators, and from the scholars as well. Because realistically, what it comes down to is you all are the ones who are impacted by it, and the teachers are going to be the first line of defense to enforce it. So it's easy for me to sit back here in my office and say, do this, when I'm not the one who's actually enforcing it.
Right, you're not necessarily always on the front lines.
Correct. So I'd like to defer that to the teachers' opinions and feedback, and then yours as scholars as well, before I say, as the campus principal, here's where I think it's appropriate.
So you're saying you're more long-term for cell phone policy, it'd be basically up to the individual teacher, or?
I think it's short answer, no. Because we work best when we have standardized behavior across the classroom. So what's decided in Mr. Haas's class would be the same in my classroom, would be the same in Mr. Sanchez's classroom, so forth and so on. When we have this kind of differentiating where I allow this in my class, but you don't allow it in yours, is where we start to have conflict. And so some scholars will then come up and say, well, in this class, I can use it. Why not in here? And I think that's unfair for a teacher to be put in that perspective, or in that situation, better yet. So what I am saying is that there would be standardized behaviors as far as for when it is allowed and when it isn't. But I will say at the very end, the conversation that we have would be more of when it is allowed rather than that it's not allowed.
I think phone should be allowed if it's independent time and the teacher's not speaking, obviously, and if you have the assigned work done and completed, or if you're working on something and need music or something like that, then I think that would be appropriate.
Maybe even to check on something. Maybe so you guys got on vacation. Your mom comes to the front office. You got a doctor's appointment today, in case she wants you out early, so you won't be late. I don't know. Maybe you just want to check something. Maybe you saw something. You're like, hey, and you look to your friend. And you're like, check this out, real quick, just for a quick laugh, and then you put it away and get back to work.
And I think you bring up a good point, is that everyone in this room right now, we're pretty good at self-regulating, at impulse control.
Kinda.
And for the most part, I think we're better than most. We wouldn't be in this position if we weren't. That being said, we do have to consider scholars and teachers and individuals that this policy is going to impact who are not very well regulated. That's
Right.
that's where, again, that skill building has to come into play. Those who have no self-regulation, those who have no ability for impulse control, that's that bottom line that we need to address. I'd love to address the ceiling, but the bottom line, that floor is where we have to address first and then bring everyone up so that impulse control and self-regulation isn't the question. It's more of just, are we addressing the needs of our scholars in the end?
All right. Let's see if we can bring in some common ground here. Mr. Sosa, after hearing the students' thoughts, do you think there's room for adjusting the policy, or do you feel the current restrictions are necessary to maintain classroom discipline?
I think there's always room for student voices. I don't think that's something that we can implement full force this school year. Some of the feedback that I heard from you all, and that's echoed by the teachers, is after every break, there's a new policy, there's a new expectation, there's a new rule. So we want to make sure that we try to minimize that so that you don't go to spring break and then come back and be like, oh, here's another thing that we have to change. Here's another, because it takes away that continuality of it. But I'd be more than willing to sit down with scholars, look at, really pour into the purpose of the policy and how we can, again, make it so that you all are autonomous on when you have your cell phones and not. But it would be something for next school year.
This is just my opinion, but here's what I think would be a good compromise. I actually brought this up when we first discussed this way back in episode 1, but I think back when I was at this middle school, there was this one teacher, math teacher I had, who basically gave us like a 5-minute brain break. Actually, it didn't exactly allow us to get us on our phones. We would just watch a video. But I think to mellow out the temptation a little bit throughout the class, maybe honestly we could keep things kind of how they are now, except you would get like a 10-minute brain break every class. Just look at your phone, catch up on everything, and then you'd have to put it back at the end of the 10 minutes. What are y'all's thoughts on that? Both the students, and what is your thought on that, Mr. Sosa?
Like to get rid of that urge to want to check your phone, and just relieve that urge to check your phone just so you can get back to focusing, to make sure you're not missing out on something.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Just 10 minutes to be social and then get back to, shall we say, lock in.
I think if we could have maybe each of the students have a little student contract of, hey, you only get 10 minutes and then you have to put it away. That way we can make sure that kids are putting it away after 10 minutes.
Plus, I think a policy like that would be good to promote the people who are kind of glued to their phone to maybe be a little less glued to their phone. This is why I'm split on this issue. Yes, I like having my own autonomy and wanting to just be on my phone and stuff like that. But at the same time, as I've grown older, I've learned that I need to have self-control. And I think we need to promote that for all our kids. Because I cannot tell you how frustrating it is when I'm like talking to my friends or just sitting down with them at lunch and I want to have a conversation with them, but I don't know how to get started, and they're just looking at their phones. Yeah. Just like, put the phones down for a second and talk to me. Try and come up with a conversation. You don't have to be glued to your phone all the time.
To get to what you were talking about, Collin, I'm not opposed to the idea of a kind of a break in it, where the structural part in me kicks back and says no. As a teacher, I know that if I stop my lesson, say 30 minutes in, and say, okay, we're going to take 10 minutes, where I may cause conflict for myself, where I may create just a problem that shouldn't really exist, is, okay, after 10 minutes, now I have a scholar who's going to continue using it. So I'm now having to spend time redirecting, so that 10-minute brain break may turn into 15 by the time I get everyone recollected. And if I have poor classroom management, I may never get it recollected. I'm not against it. Where I would push back on is I wouldn't advocate for having that brain break, that cell phone time
in the middle.
Yeah, in the middle.
So you're thinking at like maybe the end or the beginning.
Correct. When it's where you're going to have your own autonomy, you're doing your lessons, you're finishing off your work, and it's you doing your thing. Because then the natural transition would happen, a class ends and you move out. So I would be more willing to have that. but I would be strongly opposed to having something in the middle of the class.
What do y'all think about that?
That's true, because if you get on the phone and you do the middle of something, eventually you're going to lose track of time, and you're like, the teacher's, all right, it's time to get back to class, and you're like, hold up, real quick, and then you just can't get off. And it loses time, instruction time.
Do y'all think what Sosa said was a good compromise?
I think it would be. The only thing is, in that scenario, would phones still be in backpacks? Because then you would have a bunch of kids going to their backpack and then going to sit back down.
I think that's a fair conversation about we have some schools where I have friends that work at where there is a specific place on the desk. So it must be in the upper right-hand corner face down.
Okay.
And that's the way that it is on campus. Others where it just needs to not be seen. So it can be in your pocket, in back pocket, it can be in your backpack. So I think that's where we have wiggle room of where what does it look like. We may end up having the conversation saying that's teacher autonomy. If the teacher allows it to be in the student's pockets, that's fine. If they allow it to be on the desk, that's fine. If they allow it to be in the backpack, that's fine. But without having that initial conversation with teachers, I think it's difficult for me to say, here's where I want it, here's where it needs to be. Because again, then I'm making a decision without the individuals who are most affected by it and giving them a voice.
Personally, I think that's a good compromise myself.
Appreciate that.
Before we wrap up, let's shift gears slightly. We've talked about potential compromises, but now let's talk about a big development on this issue. The LA Unified School District, one of the largest school districts in the country, just announced a full ban on cell phones and smart devices in schools. They're joining the ranks of other schools across the country enforcing stricter phone policies. Do you think this kind of total ban is too harsh, or is it necessary to ensure students stay focused? And this is a question for everyone.
I think it's a little too harsh. People, they're not going to like that. That's not. I know that even just a little restrictions kind of upsets students. So completely banning it, they're just not going to follow it, I don't think.
As principal, what do you think?
I think that's a bold move. I think for me, it's going to require more resources than I'm willing to allocate. And as a father who has kids in high school, I'm not going to say that I feel uncomfortable about it because I don't text my kiddos during school time. But I struggle to understand why a full cell phone ban is necessary. Mm-hmm. But I also want to open up that they may be facing problems and situations, a level of kind of disuse that far exceeds what we're experiencing here.
Yeah, it's kind of sometimes depending on the circumstance or situation.
And we're blessed enough to face that. I will say, coming from other school districts, much larger high schools, I did have to prepare myself for a conversation whenever I had to pick up a cell phone. Sometimes it would take 10 minutes of conversation with the kiddo before we agreed to put it away in the backpack or to take it away. And that's not what we experience here. So I will say that the situation that we're facing is nothing compared to what other educators and other administrators are facing, even just down the street at some of the other schools or some of our neighboring ISDs.
Before we close out, I'd love for each of you to share your final thoughts. Do you stand by your original opinion, or has anything in today's discussion changed your perspective?
I kind of stand by my original opinion in episode 1 because I think the thoughts that I shared was like having your phone in your pocket and not using it if the teacher is talking and stuff like that. So that goes along with the cell phone etiquette type of thing. But my perspective did again change because knowing that we're moving toward the cell phone etiquette.
I kind of stay with mine, but I like shifting more with Sosa because I like what he had to say about it. Them learning new skills, like how to, like just slowly getting into teaching students when it's appropriate to have their phone out. And starting with the ban and slowly making their way to cell phone etiquette it's a nice idea.
And then with that, for more of a transition, are you guys thinking about different grade levels? Because I know the freshmen are obviously more immature than seniors and stuff, and their connection with their phones is completely different than the control that seniors have. So are you going to have more restriction for freshmen, and then as you go older, then it turns into that cell phone etiquette?
That's a fair question. I think in the first couple of years of implementation, everyone will probably have the same expectation.
Okay.
As we kind of flesh this out, it's fair to say maybe freshmen will be more restricted with seniors less. But I really don't know until we get into there. This is going to take us a while to figure out what etiquette and phone usage look like here.
Right.
Because again, this is a new development in terms of how we relate to cell phone use in the classroom. So there's not a lot of resources out there, and there's very little research. So I don't have a lot of the kind of the information background and the support that I would normally go to. So we're kind of Wild West on this one, and to figure out what works for us.
All right. Thank y'all for such a productive conversation. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Sosa, Deanna Sims, and Benito Martinez.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. That's a wrap up for this episode of The Raven Report. Huge thanks to everyone who was involved. If you're listening and you have thoughts on this issue, we want to hear them. Drop us a comment on Spotify and let us know. Should the cell phone policy stay as is, or does it need some tweaks? And don't forget to tune in next week. We're sitting down with members of Peer Forward to talk about their current initiatives, what they're working on, and some big plans for the spring semester. You won't want to miss it. Once again, I'm Collin Kerouac, and as usual, stay curious, Ravens.